Labor Talks was John DeRosier, recorded at Chippewa Valley Community Television in Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
Hello and welcome to Labor Talks. Today's guest is Phil Swanhorst, an active member of his Amalgamated Transit Union. He is a delegate on the Greater West Central Area Labor Council and also a former candidate for State Senate District 23. Phil, welcome to our show.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Thanks.
Now, I do have a few questions for
Sure.
you. That's why we're here.
You bet.
And first of all, what are the major concerns of today's bus drivers, especially in Eau Claire?
Well, bus driving actually has changed. I've drove here in the city of Eau Claire now for 14 years. And when I started, there were 4 more drivers than there are today. You would think there was more ridership back then, but ridership is increasing year after year after year. It's growing, it's not getting less. But the amount of miles driven in our transit system is becoming less. So we're getting much more busy. And our drivers are very, very busy during their shift to work anymore.
Well, that brings up a point. Are you getting younger riders or older? Is there any certain group that seems to be becoming more dependent?
Sure, there's 2 basic types of riders. The demand riders are those that can't use an automobile or other modes of transportation. Maybe they're confined to a wheelchair, or we carry a lot of REACH and CDC people who have some kind of disabilities. But there are also choice riders. Choice riders are those who do it because they're concerned about the environment. They want to save money. They want to save money on a second automobile in their family, and they choose to take the bus. And there's many more people choosing to take the bus today, not only here in Eau Claire or in Wisconsin, but all across the country. Choice ridership is definitely growing.
I have a hunch that you're getting more disabled people. Is that correct?
As our population, as we all well know, the baby boomers are getting to age, maturity, so to speak.
You mean people like us?
Like us. The ridership is growing among handicapped people. And there's a desire for those people to stay in place. In other words, to stay in their home, even though they don't have the ability of transporting themselves as they did as youth. So that's why bus ridership has gone up amongst the senior citizen population in our community.
Yeah. That leads me to my next question.
Yeah.
Because, well, quite frankly, how much training does a person need to become a licensed bus driver?
Excellent question, John. Thanks for asking.
It's about
that.
time I asked.
Yes. And we are CDL drivers. We don't just drive a car and jump into a bus. Now, the City of Eau Claire has a very thorough 3.5-week training program before we're allowed to take any passengers around on our own. It involves driving with a supervisor. It involves driving with other drivers. It involves driving on different shifts, on different routes. So they do have an extensive training program.
And that's it?
That's it.
How about any training to adapt drivers to accommodating disadvantaged, disabled people?
Oh, certainly. Our training is ongoing after the 3.5 weeks to get behind the wheel and actually transport passengers across our community. We have annual, we have quarterly training. Anytime some type of, say, wheelchair attachment devices change on our buses, there's immediate training to all drivers on how to use that new equipment. So training is ongoing, not only for handicapped or disadvantaged people, but for different routes that may get changed because of population changes around. Training is ongoing.
That must be of some comfort to a person who is restricted to a wheelchair or a walker, I imagine.
Oh, sure, we're accommodating.
Have you received any positive feedback in that area?
Oh, yes, the ridership loves the service. I mean,
And they tell you that.
and they will let us know, yes.
And what do they say?
Well, they appreciate the service because they couldn't get around without the bus service. The Abbott fans, the other type of private enterprises are way too expensive than our Eau Claire transit system. So they definitely appreciate the affordable method of transportation that they have available for them.
Excellent answer. Now,
Yes.
there are some people, such as me, who would like to expand public transit service in Eau Claire. What are your thoughts on this? Expanding bus transit service in Eau Claire.
You know, John, this is no new thought. This has been around for a long time. In fact, bus service used to connect Eau Claire and Chippewa Falls. Today, our bus service is just in Eau Claire. We have 1/2 an hour service every hour for 10 hours a day to the city of Altoona. Other than that, we're confined just to the city of Eau Claire. Now, about 4 or 5 years ago, when Mike Huggins was the administrator for the city of Eau Claire, he put together a team of people, about 21 of us. I was the only driver involved, the transit manager, some other community leaders from across our area, to create an RTA white paper. Now, what's an RTA? An RTA is a regional transit authority that allows the expansion of transit services because it allows for funding of transit to become a local duty rather than funding to be dependent upon state and federal funds only. It was a very dynamic and a wonderful proposal we put together. We met every 2 weeks for about 7 months, and then we had Governor Walker elected as our governor, and that bill went away, and RTAs are just kind of a past dream that a lot of us would like to see come back. Because transit should expand. It should expand to other communities bordering Eau Claire. It should expand to other counties bordering Eau Claire County, such as Chippewa or Dunn County. There's a need for expansion, not for a cut in transit dollars.
So obviously you do support increased transit service from one city to another.
Absolutely.
And I understand that some funding was provided for the RTAs, and that was killed too. Is that correct?
The funding would have to be approved locally to be derived from localities where an RTA was to be put into place. The state did not have the authority to fund or not fund RTAs.
I see.
They had the authority, the legislative authority, to allow localities to fund an RTA if they so desired.
So even though Eau Claire or this area could provide the funding, it was the state of Wisconsin, courtesy Governor Walker, who killed it. Am I reaching?
It was the state legislature that killed it, yes.
That's being a lot more accurate.
I'm being generous, I know, John. And it's too bad because it's not a decision that we here in the Chippewa Valley should be made by people 150 miles away in Madison. We here in the Chippewa Valley understand our needs, our wants, our desires. If we don't want transit expanded, then we can tell ourselves we're not going to fund an expansion of transit. But we should be allowed to make that decision locally. It should not have to come from decision makers 150 miles away in Madison who don't know what the feelings of the folks in the Chippewa Valley truly want.
Point blank, if we've got the money, let us do it.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad we got that settled. Now, morale. How is the bus drivers' morale, especially those within your union?
Well, most people that work public sector jobs, be it bus drivers, fire, police, street department, 911 operators, whoever, county, colleges, VOTEX, we do feel a certain amount of pride in providing a public service. That's why we do it. I provide a service of transporting people that can't find a better way of getting around our community. Public service provisions of police and fire and street personnel, they do it because they want to do it. Now, we would like to think that we are managed and supervised by people who would like to see us provide the best possible service we can. And by and far, the vast majority of managerial public sector employees do have the desire to provide that good service. However, that good service cannot be continued when, again, I'm going to reference 150 miles away, we have folks saying, you're making too much money. You're not working hard enough. We need to take stuff away from you so we can give money to someplace else. And that cannot continue to happen and expect public service employees' morale to stay high. So we need to stop taking away from public sector employees and let them do the job they want to do, and that is to provide public sector services in our communities.
Now, I've heard stories about public sector employees, including bus drivers, who are making $100,000, $150,000 a year. Have you met any people like that in public service?
I have not personally met anyone like that.
Has your income ever exceeded 100 grand?
It's never exceeded 50 grand, let me tell you. It's never come close.
Am I getting too personal here?
Actually, let me touch on that. There was a headline in a Madison paper. There was a driver made like $140,000. And you're going to say right away, well, that damn union is having drivers being overpaid. Driving a bus is different. An employee who drives a bus is different than an employee who fills a pothole for the street department. And let me tell you why. The bus has to run. If a bus is scheduled to run 16 hours a day, 2 8-hour shifts, and a driver calls in sick for one of them 8-hour shifts, we got to find another driver. We can't just shut that route down. Now, if 5 people are required to fill a pothole in a street and only 4 show up, it might take 10 hours instead of 8 hours to accomplish that job, but we're not going to shut down the street department. In transit, you have to have a driver in every bus. You can't shut down a route for 2 hours or 8 hours or 1 hour. Well, you find extra drivers and you pay them overtime when unexpected occurrences happen. And most transit systems allow and understand the need for those spare drivers. But if they don't have on hand enough spare drivers, in other words, if they don't hire enough part-time drivers to fill in for emergency services, then they're going to pay out an excessive amount of overtime. And that's what happens. It's not the driver's fault that they're driving so many hours. There's not enough spare drivers to fill in when extra shifts are created because of absences uncontrolled by the other drivers, be it sickness, a death in the family, they couldn't get to work for whatever reason. They're not the driver's fault that they're working that overtime.
And if the potholes don't get fixed, I don't want to pick on the people who fill potholes, but if those potholes don't get fixed, that means that the bus drivers have to be a little careful in avoiding the potholes.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion as well. We try to avoid them anyway for the comfort of our passengers and ourselves.
Is that a problem, avoiding potholes?
No, not here in Eau Claire. I think our streets are good.
So the pothole fillers are doing a pretty good job.
Yes.
We don't want to make enemies out of them.
Absolutely not.
Okay. Now, getting away from transit service, you did run for the State Senate, District 23,
Yes, I
and
did.
things did not turn out as well as we had hoped. It was a grueling campaign. What, in your opinion, went wrong? What happened?
Well, since the election, it's been a little over about a month and a half now. I've been involved in several discussions, and I primarily see 4 things. 3 of them are kind of iffy. The 4th one, the last one I'll talk about, I think is the real reason. But first, unfortunately, there is a backlash from our president. There's people do not like Barack Obama. And if you're affiliated any way whatsoever, be it federal, state, or local level elected position, with Barack Obama, there's people going to be against you. Whether you're right or wrong, they're going to be against you. Number two, our Democratic candidate for governor was an extremely articulate, well-intentioned, knowledgeable, and she was on the right side of the facts. But she did not have the messaging team behind her that Governor Walker did. Governor Walker knew how to message. He didn't allow his message to get bogged down in the details of all of the individual issues. And people, I think, are tired of all of those details. They just want feel-good statements, and that's what Walker's messaging team did for him. And it worked. And I got to admit, Phil Swanhorst probably could have been a better candidate. I felt comfortable with my message. I felt comfortable with the knowledge of the issues. But there are people in our community who want a candidate who's generational. Not only their lifelong residents, but their parents, their grandparents. Well, I'm not. I've only been here a quarter of a century, about 25 years. And I'm not ashamed to say I'm from South Dakota. But some people found that a fault. Another thing, and in hindsight, I didn't realize it would be so critical, but I worked full-time, 40 hours a week for an hourly wage. Not only did I work full-time, but I worked night shift, 3 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night, when most people are doing campaign activities in the evenings. So that was a little hindrance. And a third thing that was a disadvantage for me for this candidate is my wife and I own a campground up by Chippewa Falls, by Lake Wissota. And we don't have employees, just her and I run it. And that took a little time too. And I got to thank my wife tremendously because she did most of the work by far. Because on weekends when we're busy, I was out on parades or at forums or other campaign activities. So I bear some of the responsibility myself. I'm not going to blame Barack Obama or Mary Burke, but I am the candidate and I bear the brunt. But the fourth reason I think we lost, and by we, it wasn't just I, there was not one single Democratic state Senate seat that changed from Republican to Democrat. Not one. 2 Democratic senators retired in our state and they were replaced with 2 Democratic senators. But no Republicans were defeated. And in the assembly, out of the 99 seats, which they held a grand majority already, they gained 3 more assembly seats. The Democrats went back 3 seats. And I think the main reason that happened is redistricting. Redistricting was done by the Republicans to control their realm of power, and it worked. And it's working tremendously.
Now, if you had a message, and I'm sure you do, if you got a message that you want to get out to the public, you got a camera there, you got a camera there, what would you like to say? What would be your message?
Well, it's the message I've been giving since the election. Yes, I was defeated, but the main thing you cannot take away from the candidates who were defeated, including myself, is the fact that we don't quit. We don't stop, we don't turn back, we don't say, let's not keep trying. We're going to keep trying. We're going to work for all of the people, not just for the special interests, and we're going to try to make improvements in our society that we know is the direction the vast majority of people want to go. And we can do it if we don't quit.
Had you been elected, what would you have tried to do? What would you have tried to accomplish in the state legislature?
Well, we don't have enough time to go into it all, but
hit the high points.
The high points, of course, it's talking to the people about the non-popular issues. You know, anyone can talk about building bigger roads, but I'd talk about transportation. And when you talk about transportation, not just buses, but transportation includes automobiles, it includes trains, it includes ferries. We have a lot of ferries in the state of Wisconsin. Transportation includes bicycles, it includes walking paths, And unfortunately, when we hear about transportation, we just hear about roads.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that with a lot of issues. We would expand the core topic into all of the issues that the core topic actually affects.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you're very concerned about transit issues. What about education? I know you've got some thoughts on that one.
I have some thoughts. My campaign had three primary concerns, and actually, transportation was not one of the three. The three were, number one, minimum wage. The minimum wage is not a livable, acceptable wage. And people who say it is do not see what these eyes have seen driving a bus for the last 14 years. We need to provide for these people so they can provide for themselves. And if it means legislatively increasing the minimum wage, then that's what we should do. Number two, what you hit upon, education. We cannot continue to expect a public education system to be properly funded with tax dollars if we use those tax dollars and start funneling them towards private, for-profit voucher schools. And that's just the direction we're going. We're not reeling in voucher schools, we're expanding them. And I think that's the wrong direction. And the third item I think we really need to address, we've kicked this can down the road way too long, not years but decades, and that's women's rights. We have failed miserably in allowing women to protect their dignity, and we're going backwards in this state-controlled legislature controlled by Republicans when we require some ridiculous laws that violate a woman's integrity just to see her doctor. So yes, there are many issues I would definitely dwell on, but mostly I would deal with all issues directly to the people.
Hindsight is always helpful.
Yeah,
It sure is.
it's easy too.
No. I'm familiar with hindsight. I've got 70 years worth of hindsight. What would you have done differently during the campaign? What would you have done differently? And second, do you think you got enough help from the state Democratic Party? Yes, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
You're putting on the spot. Honestly, I don't think I would have done anything differently. Possibly I should have started earlier. I will admit I didn't begin seriously pursuing this job until about mid-April, first part of May, which didn't give me a lot of time. And the realization of the time required when I'm still working 40 hours a week, that was unexpected as well. As far as support, the support I got locally from county chairs, this district was in 7 different counties, was tremendous. Support I least expected I was receiving from volunteers all over, from Marshfield, Menominee, Abbotsford, was tremendous. Could the state party have done more? Personally, I feel they could have. They directed all of their efforts into one candidacy. They've done it before and they were criticized it when they direct all of their efforts into a U.S. Senate race or a governor's race. We have to start spreading the emphasis and support of our state party across the entire state. They bragged initially a year ago about a 72 county strategy. I didn't feel the 72 county strategy was there. And I hope, again, we learn from our past and we don't need to burn bridges to learn that. We need to look forward and realize how do we get other communities involved.
Now, we're coming to the end of our show here.
Sure.
I can tell because the fellow off the camera is looking at me and giving me that look, okay?
Okay.
Now, are there any questions that I didn't ask that you want me to ask? Is there anything you'd like to add that we didn't cover?
We could ask questions and say things forever and ever, but to be quite honest with you, I'm just thankful for the 6 decades I've been on this planet that I've been allowed to fulfill some dreams in this campaign and doing the multiple different jobs I've had in my life, and ending up here being a bus driver, serving the public, there is some pride to that. So yes, I'm just appreciative of all the help I've got and all the support, and I'm going to keep moving forward, and this candidate is not going to stop trying to help other people.
Now, one of the reasons I'm so pleased that you're on Labor Talks is simply because you and I have something in common. We do say what we think, period. And I sure as hell thank you for that very much.
Well, thank you, John,
Now,
very, very much.
I'm not done. I've got 2 minutes left. But we have run out of time, and that means actually we've come to the end of our program. My thanks to our audience who make Labor Talks possible, and of course, again, my thanks to Phil Swanhorst. Greatly appreciate your being here, Phil. I want to shake your hand again.
Thank you, John.
And I think that's about it. It's a wrap.
Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cbctv.org.